Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jack Pudney, and welcome to the third episode of the Fox Forum. Today, we're examining the rise of what John and I have called the AI wall. AI systems act as a continuous digital sentry across national networks, and as the pace and volume of activities increase, defenders are relying on AI to detect subtle anomalies, maintain data integrity, and support decision making in ways that simply aren't possible at human speed. Today, today to help me explore this, I'm joined by Dr. John Carbone, Senior Technical Director and Chief CIP Solutions Architect at Everfox. John brings more than 35 years of experience across defense, intelligence, and critical and national infrastructure. He's held roles including Engineering Fellow, Chief Science Advisor, Technology Director, and Chief Data Scientist. He he teaches advanced AI data science at Baylor and SMU, and has published more than 100 pages of AI and engineering. John, thank you very much for joining me today. To begin with, like to ask you a bit about the concept of the AI wall itself. How would you sort of define it in practical national security terms?
Well, we obviously have firewalls that sit on the boundaries of all of our nations, right? That try to protect from all different types of data. So imagine, in old medieval times, having a castle that sat on top of the hill that no one could reach with a moat around it, and you wanted to protect it as best you can, because inside of it is where all the important things are. Same kind of thing with now with AI though, and the level of automation. You can put these fantastic sentries that sit on the edge of your perimeter and inside, constantly monitoring everything, looking for the slightest anomalies with the greatest amount of detail, and basically creating the proverbial wall that you want to make as impenetrable as possible.
The brilliant answer. Where is the AI wall already emerging in practice? I know we can't go into specifics about national governments, but have you seen any examples in the work you've done with Everfox and before where the AI wall is starting to actually come into fruition at a national scale?
Well, I have maybe a really good analogy for you. So I went to the Nvidia GTC conference last week out in San Jose, and this is the first time I've been there. But I heard that it grew by over 10,000 people this year. There were 30,000 people converging on San Jose, which is not that big of a city.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely incredible. And I thought that, that I knew a lot about what was going on in the industry. And then I went there, and it blew my mind how it's progressing. So when I think about the possibilities, the amount of data that's being correlated and fused, the models that are being generated for biology and chemistry and all the disciplines and domains, and where they've already gotten in just a year or 2 years. I mean, exponential doesn't even sound like a good word. There needs to be one that's bigger than exponential that you can use with the amount of growth that's occurring in the space. And now imagine that with the chip base, right, that they're putting out, these neuromorphic processors that they're putting out for everyone to use, that they're supposed to mimic what goes on in the brain, but at ridiculous speeds in computation power. I mean, I saw cooling systems that looked like they were for large, trucks. They were massive racks of GPUs and power and cooling equipment running at 800 volts, as kind of like, well, that's just a standard electrical system we need, is to run things 800 volts. And it's crazy how they've, how the AI community and the has just engulfed itself with, in this type of a problem set, and trying to solve it. So I imagine the AI walls being stood up everywhere, because the amount of anomalies that they can detect and the level of detail they can detect them is just incredible.
So if we move on and think about the AI wall in the national defense perspective, how have you heard of, or do you know any, we'll call them non-classified examples of where an AI surface attack actually, an AI prevented an attack or noticed an attack from when it was happening, which maybe a human might not have been able to notice before?
I actually don't know of any on the unclassified side where any of that
But
has been done. But I would really be surprised if it hasn't. And I would be willing to bet right now if we actually did a query of some kind, or used a chat bot or anything, I bet in like 2 seconds you could find
an example.
thousands of instances where AI is attacking things and AI is protecting things. We know that AI has already been used to attack
Yeah,
everything. I mean, from even going down to automated phone calling, and chatbots being shoved into LinkedIn chat rooms, whatever, and collecting all of the data and exfiltrating it out, right? I mean, you have to watch now. Like, even if you go into a Signal conversation, someone can drop a bot in there, and you think it's a human, and all it's doing is collecting all the information that everyone's
yeah.
communicating about. I mean, that's where we've gotten. So that's where the whole hide in plain sight comes in.
Do you think are there ways for AI to prevent attacks rather than just notice them or bring them up?
Say that again.
Are
Can
there
you
any
repeat the
ways
question?
that AI can meaningfully prevent attacks, or is its primary value just a detection and containment sort of tool?
Well, think about the fact that there's AI and then there's generative AI. And really, generative AI is pretty much you creating solution sets to go off and go do something after you have monitored,
Yeah,
right? So in the future, right, the slightest anomalies, right, many different types of things can be done, right? And it just depends on what types of threats they are and what you're actually trying to mitigate. But like, you can quarantine things, you can block things, you can throw them away, you can let them come in, you can actually watch them trying to do something to your environment so you can figure out who's doing it, right? There's all kinds of ways, right, to go about doing those kind of. You can have automated bots doing all the monitoring and maybe even communicating back to the
yeah,
attackers in ways that can spoof them or get them off the track or do something really, much more unique than we would expect.
absolutely. And so with AI, if we're thinking about AI as a preventative measure or a way of, as you said, it can do basically, it's all encompassing, can do all of those things. That brings up the concern, which I actually spoke to Tom Silly about in the last episode, which is sort of operational reliability and trust within AI systems. So
Yep.
if you could walk us through sort of like the chain of trust, is what we'd called it, which is sort of sensors to pipelines to models to decisions. Where do failures hurt the most within that chain of trust? And where does the human come in? Where does AI stop? Can you talk to me a little bit about the trust issue?
Yeah. So remember that trust is about humans trusting something that's doing something for them, right? You're creating a level of automation, right? Or different levels of automation that someone has to trust. So you have to be able to measure that trust. And no one
Mm,
does that really today. We just don't. We think about zero trust is all about, well, do I know the person who's doing whatever they're doing to my system? That's what we talk about from a zero trust. But when you talk about AI and you think about all of the capabilities and capacities it has, and where it's all being used in highly critical environments, medical environments, it's at all these different places, it can become really problematic.
yeah.
So, but anyway, I lost my train of thought there. So if you don't mind repeating the question again.
So where in the sensor to pipeline to model to decisions, we're getting all
Oh,
this data from. and collating
Yeah.
it, and AI needs to refine it, and then a human presumably needs to make a decision based on that data.
Right.
Is
So
there
let me
one?
ask, yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you, right? So what does it mean to measure trust, right? How do you measure how much you trust a system, right? So you have to
Yeah,
quantify it and qualify it somehow. One of the ways that I do that, like when I teach AI, is there's something that we coined about a decade ago called the autonomic information continuum, which basically talks about it's a continuum, think left to right, where it's manual, it's automated, it's semi-automated,
yeah,
automated, semi-autonomous, fully autonomous, and maybe even at some point it's automated to the point that it becomes self-evolving,
yeah.
right? All
Is that
those are
not
different.
a,
What's that?
sorry, would that not be AGI when it becomes
I
self-evolving?
think that's what most people would call AGI, right? But something that can self-evolve, but different things can self-evolve in different qualities and in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so you can just remember things better. There are lots of ways that you can improve that. So if you think about that continuum,
Mm.
and you think everything from manual to self-evolving, in between, there's different levels of automation. As you automate, the systems you build become more complex, they become more ambiguous, and you trust them less
Yeah.
until you actually measure them, measure the trust in the system, to help you determine how much intelligence you have to build into a system to solve the problem you're trying to solve, right? Which is what engineers have to learn how to do when they leave my class, is they have to know that when they go out in the real world and they're weaned off of their professor, that they can go off and figure this stuff out for themselves, right? And so how much intelligence do you build in? How do you measure that? What does it mean to build in intelligence into a system? So I'll give you an idea. So here's maybe a little bit of an interesting idea. Let's say you want to automate a UAV, right? You want to
Yeah.
automate a UAV to drive itself from the hangar out to the tarmac so it can go take off on its own. And you could measure that trust, right, in different ways. How easily can it get from point A to point B? Do you got to open the doors first? All these things, right? So that trust, there's whole pieces of that system you have to measure to determine and mitigate what the things that you don't trust to try to fix them, right? Now, you might trust it to drive itself out on the tarmac,
Yeah.
but maybe you haven't built it to the point yet that you might trust it flying over homes or
Okay.
or things of that nature. So then you have to measure that, and you have to, how well does it handle atmospheric conditions? How well can it actually fly? I mean, all of these, and how well does it fly, right? And or is it battery powered, and how long does the battery last? All of those things factor into the trust equation that helps you determine whether you're going to trust something to do what it is it's going to
And
do.
how would one build more trust than that example?
Well, that's the thing. You have to decompose that entire process, and individually, you have to measure those individual components in there to determine whether or not you believe it's going to be able to function or do its job to what level, 90%, 100%?
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
it okay? Is it okay if it doesn't make it to the tarmac every time? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, that has to be measured, and very, very, very few people actually do that, if any at all, except for maybe in my class. But the point is, you have to measure trust, and if you do not measure and don't measure, try to determine. Here's the other part, right? Every project a company is given, or if they win a contract, right? It costs time, money, effort, people, resources, right, to create that thing. And if you actually measure the trust and you measure what you're actually trying to do, you might actually get it done faster, and you might actually get it completed even better than you might have if you hadn't done it. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to measure trust, other than what most people are looking for with not trusting AI, but that's a whole different discussion as to why they don't trust it. But
And
first of all, they don't measure it. So
but it would still be a sort of a trust versus speed and efficiency argument, essentially. If it does the trust out, does the need to trust outweigh the need
yeah,
for speed and efficiency?
absolutely. Now people say, well, okay, well, now let's talk about, how do you measure the trust of AI? Well, it's the same problem. You're just using different software. AI is software. It doesn't change, the fact that, software has problems. The same
Yeah.
problems that software has, AI has also. The difference is, and with where trust becomes such an issue with AI, and that we have such a difficult time talking about it, about the trust of AI because of how well it can automate things. If people just understood that what AI does is it remembers data, right? We've had this discussion before. It remembers
I was
data.
going to ask you
It
about
does
this.
not, it does not learn. Okay, those are two different things. Learning means you actually know how to apply the things that you've actually remembered.
Yeah.
And it does it probabilistically, right? It is saying, what is my likelihood that I'm going to be able to walk up these stairs? The human mind does not work that way in a probabilistic way. It looks at everything that it sees and it contextually pulls that information in, and it makes it, and then you physically make a decision to go do something. Um, the AI remembers all those things, but a lot of times, most of these models are all trained, cyber models, medical models, biological models, they're trained on data that people don't even know when it was collected. They'll say, well, we just used it on the standard model that's out there that everyone uses to train on. They don't
Well,
know who created it, why, etc. You see
I,
what I
I
mean?
wanted to ask. I wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
that. The
hmm
that we're talking about LLM models here for the most part, correct? When we're talking
all of
about
them,
how models are
all
trained, and
all machine learning algorithms, they all work the same way.
so is
People
it?
say, well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
All right. Well, people say, well, in machine learning, there's reinforcement learning, which basically means I'm learning of the stuff I learned, right? But I'm learning it better, and I know what I learned before, so that makes my learning better. No, you're just remembering more things that you did. You're still not. It's still not the same, right? You are gaining some additional context, in terms of in that memory, right, where that you're storing, but you still have to learn how to apply that information that you're gleaning.
Hmm.
And that is where the transition needs to take place. So that's one of the big issues.
Yeah, I find the model training thing fascinating. How people can just train them, don't know how their models are even trained in the first place.
Yeah.
I understand for the
It-
big ones like ChatGPT and stuff like
yeah, well,
that, but
they just assume that they get everything, and people just take it for granted. And it's a problem. But yeah, I mean, look, there are a lot of great things that it's doing for folks. It allows you to build things faster, to build them better. But the human, to your point earlier, right, where in the initial monologue, humans still need to be in the loop, right?
mm,
But we're still going to keep automating, and because that's where automation is money. And with the different levels of automation, we'll build more trust, you know, in the software and in the systems that come out. But yeah, there's still a lot of work to do though.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I wanted to ask about some going back to a broader level, um, applications of AI at a national level,
hmm
and how what more AI versus AI conflicts might look like in the future, if that's even a possibility. Um, so could AI create a strategic imbalance between certain countries? People have better AI systems than other countries, and how would a coalition that uses different AI models or systems maintain the sort of interoperability that they need to without exposing attack? Can you answer that without getting too specific?
Yeah, I think the answer is actually somewhat simple. I don't want to oversimplify it because it is a big issue. But if if you had when someone invented when they first invented the Gatling gun, which was basically almost like
Yeah.
the first machine gun, and the other guys were still fighting with bows and arrows and muskets, kind of created an advantage, right? And I think in any case, right, the weapons, the thing about software is, though, everyone can use it. right?
Mm.
And everyone is using it. And so, can they build better models, over there better than, we can build them over here? Sure, they can. Maybe they build them differently. The same way they would build a newer advanced weapon or even and using it for good. Would they be able, are other folks going to be able to cure disease better, faster? Sure, because they have different perspectives of the way they look at the system, but yeah, they all have access to the same tools now, and even better tools in some places than not. So yeah, 100%. Those same problems are going to exist, and think of all of the things that we watch from Hollywood, all can take place.
I hope
You're
not.
going to have robots fighting robots in the field so that humans don't die. That's essentially what's happening with the drones. The drones
Yeah,
are automated deployment mechanisms. They're going to get smarter. They're going to put more AI inside of them. They'll be able to sense better, see better, target better. So yeah, that's going to happen.
as long as there's a good trust model there, I hope.
Well, think about it though. What does trust really mean when someone's shooting at you? So, for example, the Ukrainians were actually putting hand grenades on UAVs you could go buy at Walmart, and they found ways to use them that way. So, trust is, will it do the job that I want it to do?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it just depends on the job you're trying to get done, and whether or not you can trust it to do that, no matter what the problem is.
So it does bring me on to another topic that I like to talk about, which is sort of
Sure.
looking forward at AI. I think there are two main things that we've touched on today, um, which is artificial general intelligence and then also quantum in the future. How do you see the pair of them shaping the AI wall in the future, or it will, yeah, how do you see them affecting it? Is it just going to get, as you said, more and more robots and drones and
Well, I think on the quantum side, quantum compute, let's specifically call out
yeah,
quantum compute, because there's quantum communications, quantum encryption, and then quantum compute. On the quantum compute side, if we think that AI and the solutions that people are developing fast now, multiply that by 1,000,000 times is essentially
right,
what you're going to get with quantum, because quantum makes the entire processing of anything truly parallel. Today, people think computers do things in parallel. They do not. And that's because, there's lots of processing in there, lots of cores that all, but they're most of the time running off of one clock. And the fact that they run off of one clock means that you can only clock when you clock things, right? You can clock them at the same time, and they are doing things, but not everything's in parallel because the data buses are singular. And so all the chips are on a single data bus. So until it's truly parallel and everything is running, from the memory to the disk to everything, when that starts to run in a true quantum compute like environment, everything is truly running in parallel and almost running instantaneously. And so that's
right.
where the magnitude of improvement comes from on the quantum compute side. Then you add quantum communications to the equation. Now things instantly transfer globally. Like, we're not even talking a millisecond. We're talking like, if I flip this bit here, it flips in the UK right by you exactly at the same time.
Right.
And that type of then quantum communications along with quantum compute, you now have instantaneous communications point to point, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm with you.
there's a vast amounts of improvement over and
And
above what
then
we're seeing today.
bringing that into AI, that would be the same for AI. It just exponentially grows its
Yeah.
capabilities and
If there's a yeah, if there's a better word for exponential, yeah. But yeah, it's like exponential times 3
yeah.
billion, whatever the number is, right? But it's some amazing uh improvements.
And so AGI, or artificial general intelligence, is likely to come a step before quantum, correct? Or
Yeah, I don't believe that's going to happen. Um, so a self-evolving life form essentially is what they believe an AGI is, that can think and do the things that a human does. Can it digest a lot more information than we can? 100%. Can it apply all that knowledge to something? No, it cannot. And as the as but now the more we take and we say, the more we say, look, if you see these 30,000 things, go implement this one task, because we know that these 30,000 things are always done when we go implement that task. Yeah, you'll be able to automate everything, and people will think
yeah,
that it is generally intelligent when it is really not. It is still only about remembering and being told what to do. Um, and because we're saying, hey, if you see these patterns, I want you to go do these things. So yes, then those things will go off and do it, and you will believe that it is generally intelligent when it really is not. Well, it's not. There's subtle differences, right? Did it still perform the task extremely well? 100%. Probably
yeah,
did a great job. So, but I think it's a very important distinction, because it fits into that component that I spoke to you about before, about hallucination, which I think is such a terrible word
can you
for.
explain that, please, if possible? The
Yeah,
hallucination.
yeah. So the thing is that when people perceive a system to be smarter than it actually is, and it does something that you don't want it to do, why are you saying that machine is hallucinating? It is a completely improper word to use for that type in that context. And that's essentially what we're doing, because we don't understand the underlying mechanisms that of what it's using to do what it's doing. Therefore, we put the onus on the machine and we
Yeah.
tell it it's hallucinating, when we're actually delusional, because the definition of delusion is when you misperceive. And so when something that's not, anyway, so that's really where the term, I've always had a real big problem with it. But yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, I love that. And so again, it sounds like the again pie in the sky, looking forward, quantum and
Yeah.
AGI do come to fruition. It all starts coming good and getting super quick. What are the guardrails? This is I think the question that everyone always asks about AI. How do we stop it? Or where does the human fall in again? Or is it just so good and I don't know, are the prompts so correct that it can't do anything wrong?
So again, if you measure trust and you look at that system holistically and you know what it can do and what it can't, right? You want to be as 100% correct as you possibly can, that that system, machine, software can do what you're actually asking it to do. If we go about it that way, you'll be able to put guardrails around it, but you have to understand those pieces. You have to
Yeah,
understand your data. And today, because of the underlying, that undercurrent of us just simply trusting these massive systems that do these incredible things for us, just trust them out of the box, that is a problem. And so putting guardrails around that is an issue. But when we have specific things, specific tasks and things that we try to do, there are guardrails and things that people are doing, just like you've heard about the Anthropic, issue. They put some guardrails around theirs. It was very specific, though. It was kind of an outer layer of software that basically said, if people ask me to do this in this certain way, even if it's, and even if they word it kind of funny to try to get it through
yeah,
my filter and all that stuff. They put some guardrails around it that way, software around software, to try to not allow the thing to do the things they didn't want it to do. So there are ways to put guardrails around things, but it's very difficult when you're basically ingesting the world,
is
right, of data.
Is there a way to do it with hardware rather than software?
So remember that hardware is simply hardware with firmware and software running on it. So
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, can you? And yes, I mean, I know there's a lot of it allows you to scale things,
Mm,
down to much smaller, so you can put more things out there to monitor, more things out there to detect. It's a lot harder to take a hardware, firmware enforced type system and hack it and do things to it because it's very difficult to get into the firmware and get into the hardware. Much easier to get into an application and change it and or onto your laptop and change the software there, right? Much easier to do than getting into the hardware. So, I mean, there are benefits there, but it doesn't necessarily solve the
yeah.
big underlying issue.
So I'd like to bring it back to the AI wall as we sort of wrap things up.
Yeah.
Um, 10 years out, what does a mature AI wall look like? How are the government using AI to support defense of the nation?
Think instantaneous security, just like instantaneous communication, instantaneous compute, right? With quantum, you're basically working towards instantaneous and self-evolving
Yeah.
network protection and data protection from your adversaries. Um,
And
Today,
is that scalable across like critical and national infrastructure as well, or is it purely government systems?
it's so what's hard about scaling it is the fact that many of those systems have been built over 50, 100 years even, right? And so a lot of those systems are much more difficult,
Mm,
right, to fix. So to fix all of the things. So that's why a lot of times, just like when with network architecture, originally most folks just develop perimeter security, right? It's the same kind of thing, but how small is your perimeter? It could be really tiny. It could be around your laptop, right? But it just depends on how they do that. But being the fact that software is so much more scalable, right? You now have that ability to do all that instantaneous security. And I think it's a very solid type of a wall type environment that'll eventually be created. But by the same token, um, software is software, and there are vulnerabilities every time you reversion it. That goes for AI software too. So vulnerabilities can be injected, inserted, either accidentally or maliciously in that
mm.
type of software too. So you have to have. I think the other thing you'll see is you'll have software monitoring software. Um, More instantaneously as well, because you'll be looking for internal anomalies just like you're looking for external ones.
Yeah.
The real problem is discerning what is an anomaly and what is just normal processing. And many times, those things can look very similar. So the that's why it can be extremely difficult, even if you have the type of instantaneous security where you can, detect anomalistic behavior. It can be extremely difficult to even detect that, even with AI, because some of
Yeah.
those things look the same. When I write to memory with my application trying to do something important, right? The very same, they could be writing something to memory maliciously. You don't know the difference unless, there are a lot of other different types of data you have to look at to try to make those determinations. And those kind of things will still be out there. So we're just going to have to keep, doing the best we can to try to determine what those anomalies are.
My big takeaway from this is let's make sure we can measure trust before we get going with any of this. I
Yeah,
think that's the
yeah.
key.
There's one other thing though that I will tell you is that I've told people, but they don't want to do it because it takes too much work. And that is, you can take all the software and you can remove everything that it was trained on, and only train it on the things you want it to train on that you know and trust already.
Yeah.
If you build it that way from scratch, you have a lot more peace of mind in what you're building it with. And a lot of those systems are also trained on data where they didn't have data, so they created their own. So they actually had AI systems create their own data, right, based on rules they gave it. So likely biased, right?
Yeah, true, true.
Information, and said, hey, build it this way, which can be biased. But the point is, there are lots of ways, other ways people could do that, but no one's going to do that. No one is going to like remove all of that trained data, because why would I remove Chat GPT 5.0, right, when it's all, because they're just going to blindly continue to trust.
Yeah.
And so labeling the data, putting guardrails around it like Anthropic did, et cetera. There are ways that we can protect, and allowing only certain people to access things. We do have some minimal control over who sees what and those kind of things, but it's not easy. So, and getting guardrails around stuff that you don't even know how it was trained is just a big problem.
Well, I think we'll leave it there on that brilliant note,
Okay.
on that high note.
Well, I don't know if it was
um,
brilliant, but I appreciate it. So,
no, it was great. Thank you very much, John. Thanks for coming on. Um, I thought it was a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point.
all right, I
Thank you very much.
appreciate it. Thank you.